me.
Welcome to the Senior Rehab Project,
The podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults.
And now, your host, Dustin Jones.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast. This is a special edition. We are coming live from my Ford Focus on Interstate 64 in the westbound lane, headed to Lexington, Kentucky. And I have a very, very special guest, the one and only Dr. Megan Jones. How are you doing?
Hey, y'all.
So this is my lovely wife. You all have heard me talk about her several times. All good things, of course.
Better be.
Yeah, but we're headed back home. We're at a wedding. No James Brown music though. I was kind of upset about that, weren't you?
Yeah. I mean, still great time, but
Yeah, no funk. So it was all good. But I figured we could just talk just about life.
sure.
How's doctoring going?
So far, so good. Been in my new job a couple months now, and just finding that transition into a role of not being a resident anymore, where people confirm that my plans are okay. I just get to make them myself and hope that they're okay. So
Yeah.
that's been fun and terrifying, and it's going really well.
Yeah, and you haven't killed anyone to the best of your knowledge.
To the best
so
of my
that's
knowledge,
a victory. So you got this all figured out, it sounds like.
On the outside, that is what it looks like, isn't it?
Oh man, it's been awesome couple months. We'll ask some more questions. I do
Okay.
want to ask some more specific questions. Actually, we have some listener generated questions from the people in the senior
You didn't tell me about that.
Yeah, I didn't. Well, now you know.
So how is the Senior Rehab Project going? I mean, is there anything like you're really excited about or not excited about, or
Yeah.
what's going on with that? We haven't talked about it lately.
I know it's been going well. For listeners that aren't aware, I think I've talked about it on this show. We recently moved, so Megan was in residency. We were in Columbus, Ohio, doing home health. We took a couple months off, traveled a little bit, and now we're in Lexington. And I just started my new position as a home health PT. And in that time period, like the podcasts were still coming out. The Senior Rehab Project in itself was kind of growing, but I had no freaking clue what why am I doing this? What's the next steps? Like, do I want this thing to grow? Do I want to keep doing it? And, I journaled a lot on our trip, which you saw. And when we got back, I just kind of didn't have like a clear set plan. It was just kind of just going with the flow, doing what I've always done, talking to people, recording it, putting it up on the internet. And as we spent more and more time here in Lexington, I started to get a better idea of like what I want to do with this little side hobby that, I started, more than a year ago now. So I guess that's the thing I'm excited about is the Senior Rehab Project is growing from, just one podcast of my ramblings with other people into a podcast network. Yeah, so a podcast network. So we're actually expanding into... Sorry, folks, for this break in the conversation, but we had some technical difficulties, and we will get right back into this convo where I was talking about the Senior Rehab Project podcast network and the first podcast that I would like to announce that is joining the team. Christina Novak, you know her.
Yeah.
You haven't met her, but you...
I feel like I know her.
Yeah, exactly. She's going to start her own podcast called the Stave Podcast. Everyone that listens to this show is very familiar with her. She's been on, a couple times.
Uh-huh.
And her and Nick are going to be doing their own podcast, talking about a lot of the same topics that I'll talk about with my guests, but it's geared towards the end user, the patient, or the customer, whichever you want to say it. So that'll be cool.
Yeah.
Actually, I think this would be a good time to play a little soundbite from Christina and Nick so people can hear from their words what they're going to be doing. So we'll let them take it away.
Okay. Take 11. might be 12. Who knows?
Hi, everyone. I'm Christina.
And I'm Nick. And together we host the Stave Off podcast. We also own Stave Off Physiotherapy and Exercise Facility, a spot where we can practice what we preach and put our information into helping our clients achieve their goals.
Our podcast is about giving you the information you need to stave off illness and injuries, letting you live a long and happy life. Through the podcast, we can answer your questions and share our stories of working in our physiotherapy clinic and gym, helping people of all different backgrounds stay fit and active. We're hoping to give you a whole bunch of health information that you can use in your day-to-day life. We can't wait to get started and hope you can follow along. If you want to hear more about us in the meantime, check us out at staveoff.ca and reach out. We love hearing your stories. And until next time, bye now.
So yeah, that's Christina and Nick, Stave Off Podcast. And there's not an exact date for that yet, but if you go to seniorrehabproject.com, you click on the link that says join at the bottom of the page, you'll get on the newsletter, which you will get notifications of that. I'll also be posting it in the Senior Rehab Project Facebook group, which you need to click on that join link on the homepage to get to that as well. So Stave Off Podcast. There's another one. Another one. Yeah, this is crazy.
You talked all these people into getting on board with you.
I know, it's insane. Absolutely insane.
I don't know how you do it.
Lots of bribing. A lot of incentives. Ethical, I cannot comment on if it was ethical or not. But anyway, another previous Senior Rehab Project guest, Mandy Chamberlain from Seniors Flourish. She's an occupational therapist. So what she's going to do is basically going to be the OT version of what I'm doing now, but so much better. She's going to knock it out of the park. She's very creative. She's just an awesome OT, but she loves older adults as well. So she is going to have a podcast geared towards the OT clinician and just do so much better than I did. And I'm really excited about it because she's awesome. She's killing it. If no one has checked out her site, seniorsflourish.com. But we have a soundbite from her as well. So let's hear, as we should, let's hear what Mandy has to say about her own podcast.
Hi there, this is Mandy Chamberlain, occupational therapist from the Seniors Flourish podcast coming out early 2017. My goal is to help other OTs working with older adults be the best they can be, not only by showcasing relevant interviews, newest research, and hot topics, but also to get OTs excited about working with older adults, give you some actionable ideas that you can take and use in your own practice right away, and definitely have some fun along the way. I'd love your input on what you'd like to hear on the Seniors Flourish podcast, topics, interviews, or whatever you think will help you on your own OT journey. Check out seniorsflourish.com/podcast and leave some of your suggestions. I'm super excited to be part of the Senior Rehab Podcast Network. Let's do this.
So, Seniors Flourish podcast. So let's see. We have the Senior Rehab podcast. We have the Stave Off podcast, geared towards patients or clients or whatever you want to say, people, and then Seniors Flourish, which is geared towards occupational therapists.
Gotcha.
Okay, and then we have another one.
What?
Yeah, it's crazy. No, well, this one is just something that I'm helping out with. So it's the Home Health Minute. Okay. So the Home Health section of the American Physical Therapy Association is starting their own podcast, and we're going to speak to the home health clinician, the PTs, the PTAs, the coolest people in rehab as far as I'm concerned. I'm a little biased, but we're going to be doing probably a monthly podcast, and it's going to be a way for the section, the leadership, to be able to communicate with the people like me that are out and about in our little Ford Focuses seeing patients.
Yeah, awesome.
So we've got a family. A Senior Rehab Project family that is all oriented around, for me, it's all about that mission that I've had from the get-go, is how can we advance rehab for older adults? Like, how can we better care for them? How can we better serve them? And I feel like this is a way to do it because, you know, I'm enabling other really smart people to get their word out, and that makes me happy. So
I mean, as you all can see, with all that going on, if Dustin ever would happen to complain that I may ask him to repeat things here and there about, now who is that you're talking about again? Which one is that? You guys can see why.
yeah, I talk about all my internet friends, which that sounds kind of awkward, but and Megan knows a lot of them. But just for me talking about so-and-so on Twitter said this, so
Right.
it's an interesting dynamic. You have met Sarah Haig.
Met Sarah.
You've
We
met...
had a nice tour of Chicago.
Yep, Cindy
Sarah.
Kraft.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't get to
nice
meet Dee
dinner.
Cornetti. She was in town.
Not yet.
You know Steven Stockhausen, who is a guest
I
on the
do.
show.
Yeah.
You spent lots of time with Tim DeFrancesco, who was
Yes.
on the show. You did 2 episodes.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that's about it. So hopefully you'll get to meet more.
I'm sure.
So, all right. So that's a big announcement, folks, that I was talking about last week. So Senior Rehab Project is turning into a podcast network. All right. So all the links for all those different podcasts are going to be in the show notes. The one that they're going to be available on the date that this podcast is released. But be sure to go to seniorrehabproject.com and go to the bottom of the page, click join, so you can get an email and then a notification in our Facebook group that these podcasts are live, and you can subscribe to them, you can share them with people that it would help, and you can help us get the word out. So I'd greatly appreciate that. Okay, so now I think this is a good time to go to the next segment of our drive back home, which is listener-generated questions.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, fielded some questions in the Senior Rehab Project Facebook group for you, my lovely wife. Since I'm driving, I would ask that you could take my cellular device and read the questions for me, read the name and then the question.
Okay.
I'm sorry I'm having you do this, but I feel like that's the safe thing to do right now. So,
Yeah, I would agree with that.
okay.
It's all about teamwork.
Yes.
All right, first one is from Jessica Lynn. She asks, what was your experience with learning about PT in med school? Honestly, very little. I went into med school kind of with a leg up because I grew up with a father who's a physical therapist, which I think you're going to be meeting later.
Yep, he's going to be a guest on the show.
Yeah. And then at the time I was dating Dustin, who was in physical therapy school. So I just assumed everyone knew what physical therapists did, and I was incorrect. Yeah, it's really not talked about very much in basic, like in your basic medical sciences first couple years. I mean, you kind of hear a little more about it as you go through your clinicals, but it's kind of just dropped here and there as, adjunctive treatments and things like that.
Yeah. Well, tell them about Anatomy Lab.
So my first year would have been second semester. My first year, we were in human anatomy, dissecting our cadavers, smelling terrible for the entire semester. And we were doing our head and neck section and learning about the brain and the brain stem. And one of the teacher's assistants was trying to find the brain stem anatomical models. And he was like, oh, I don't think we have any right now. The PT students are studying them. And one of my classmates was like, why do they have to study the brain? And I was quite shocked and had to pick up my jaw off the floor. So, yeah, people don't know.
Yeah, and that was probably the norm.
Yeah.
In the sense of just not having a clue. They knew that that physical therapist was a part of the healthcare realm, but
Yeah.
not much after that. For the most part, you can't be too general, but
Yeah. So, next question's also from Jessica Lynn. She says, how can we support each other's professions and our shared goals with patients? I think a big part of that is just having more communication and education between both parties. I think just the way, we didn't really learn much about the exact roles that physical therapy can fill. We need that education, and we need physical therapists to come to us and say, like, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do. And vice versa. I think physicians need to say, hey, this is the limit of what we can provide this patient, and beyond that, we don't have the skill set to really sit down and educate this patient about their injury or their ailment, or, you know, kind of how we go about fixing that and retraining them to fix that themselves.
Did you ever have any PT lecturers or PTs on any panels while you were in medical school? Like, did you hear from them in your didactic class?
Not on panels. We did have to do, in my medical school, we had to do some like interdisciplinary shadowing.
Okay.
So I was with an OT. I personally didn't choose to go with the PT because I had a bit of experience, but there was opportunity for that, like kind of in that multidisciplinary training. And then I know a few of our lecturers, kind of through anatomy and things like that, were physical therapists that kind of taught in the PT school, but they taught some of our anatomy lectures and stuff like that.
Okay, so there were opportunities to learn about physical therapy if you sought them out or happened to get matched with that shadowing.
Sure.
But it wasn't, you know, given to everybody.
Right. It was not mainstream.
Okay.
PowerPoint lecture.
All right.
Next question is from Joe Daniels. He asks, what have been her interactions with PTs in the hospital, ideally in the ER if she works with one, both personally and professionally? So personally, you know, I have a dad and a husband and a sister-in-law, all of which are PTs, and then all of their friends that are PTs.
And you love them.
And I love all of them dearly. They're amazing. Professionally, in the ER specifically, I got a little opportunity to work with a PT student within the last year of my residency. Someone that I think you all have gotten to meet on the podcast, Dr. Sutherland, was one of my attendings at Ohio State. She does a lot of research in geriatrics, and she had a PT student in the emergency department and kind of screening the patients falling into the geriatric categories in terms of like fall safety and, you know, homegoing disposition safety and all that stuff. And I think that's a great new addition. I know a lot of like mostly larger academic centers are kind of adding PTs into a role in the emergency department, which is awesome. I think we need that help and that foresight of like, what does homegoing look like for this patient, and are they going to be safe? Can they leave my emergency department and all that good stuff? Because, you know, we don't want to put people in the hospital if we don't have to. I think otherwise, you know, I got to work with physical therapy a good bit on when we would have our off-service rotations. So when we were like in the surgical ICU or specifically like on my trauma rotation, I mean, PTs were a huge integral part of the rounding team. Which was great because we would get absorbed in some of those numbers of like, you know, what are the patient's labs today? Did they have a bowel movement? Did they pass gas? And kind of forget about like, have they actually gotten out of their bed? And physical therapy was awesome about reminding us like, hey, can we get this patient up today? Can we start moving this patient? Like all, you know, just part of that step toward like getting patients home quicker, getting them out of the ICU, whatever. So I think that professionally, those have been kind of my interactions with physical therapy.
That reminds me of Kyle Ridgway, the guy with the socks.
Oh yeah, sure.
You remember the socks?
Oh yeah, we're building your collection.
I'm trying to get up to Kyle's game, but we'll have to buy another dresser to house those, which I don't think you're probably
I think we
cool
need a
with
bigger
that.
apartment.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. But he talked about he's in the ICU and just how it's so easy for everybody to be so focused on the labs and all these different values and just more of the medical side of things, but then kind of let the physical function kind of go by the wayside. And sometimes, you know, that may be one of the last things discussed when you are having those discharge planning conversations. And just how that's just wild. But it does seem like that is changing to where the medical establishment is looking at physical function. How can we get people home safely? Because now, if they have a readmit, they're going to get dinged a little bit. So I think it's going in a good direction.
Yeah.
So cool. So I think that is all the questions.
Yeah.
So you do have one more question to answer, though. So this is my favorite question. I end every podcast with this question. Let's say we're at CSM. All right, you know about CSM. I'm going there in February this year.
Yeah. I am hopeful you can find another Carl's Jr. at a really late hour and call and wake me up from there.
So there's a handful of listeners that were there that night at Carl's Jr. that are probably laughing right now. But yeah, some people go to national conferences and eat at really nice restaurants. I and a handful of other people go to Carl's Jr. And it was lovely. But so let's say we're at CSM. This is before we go to Carl's Jr. You are in one of the big auditorium rooms. You have every geriatric rehab clinician in the room.
Wow.
And you have their attention. What would you want them to know?
So, like, as an emergency physician, what do I want them to know?
Yes.
I do not just prescribe narcotics and tell people to get surgery.
Really?
Right.
Huh.
Yeah. Contrary to popular belief, I do not just prescribe Percocet.
Huh.
Sometimes I do Vicodin but no, I think, I just kind of that same idea of just like, how do we help each other's profession and how do we be better as a larger medical team? And I think just wanting people to know we're all on the same team. We're on the same page. We want to do what's best for our patients and what's safest for our patients. And I just think we need to have a better understanding of what that looks like on either end. So.
Yeah, and I think from the PT standpoint, one of the best ways that you can get an understanding of the complexities of that situation, like the narcotic or the opioid issue that we have. And like the APTA, our professional organization, has a big #ChoosePT campaign where, get PT, first, and don't, take opioids, and PT can, fix your problems. And I'm obviously a big believer in PT, but I hope that message is not at the expense of condemning our physician colleagues. And so all that to say, I highly encourage PTs to check out ZDog MD, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes, to where he uses satire and does music videos where he will dub over popular songs that you already know, but give the physician perspective. Because from the PT that has no idea what it's like in the emergency room, it's very easy for me to say, oh, well, just don't give them pain medication and just, send them out the door and prescribe PT. And it's not that easy, is it?
I wish.
Yeah. Well, tell them, like, why can't you do that?
I think, it's this huge, complex web, right? And, you have someone sitting there in front of you, in tears, or, they have an injury, they're in pain. And, you want to help them. You want to, get them to a place where they feel like they can move and get PT, or, but you don't want to add to this, what addiction you may think they have, or you don't want to start one. You don't want to send a patient away to fill out your Press-Ganey score that says you didn't treat their pain and didn't address their problems. Press-Ganey is a feedback tool used to, given to patients, used to rate kind of what their experience was like in multiple settings, whether that be inpatient or the emergency department, or it is a 4-letter word to most physicians. The Press-Ganey is, but it can be used as a tool to affect how a physician or a hospital is compensated.
Right.
And a big marker on that scorecard is, did you treat their pain? And it's kind of all about patient satisfaction. So, and not to say that's why pain medication's prescribed, but it is part of that complex web, I think. I mean, it's a huge problem. It's just so complex and complicated, and but I hope that that's not all that the medical field and physicians are seen for, and that they're just candymen.
Yeah, and that's what worries me about this Macklemore video out.
Yeah.
Drug dealers, is that what it's called?
Yeah, drug dealer.
Yes, it's bringing light to a big issue, and I'm very happy about that. But I mean, it absolutely criminalizes physicians, and it, talking about like you making money off of prescribing pain pills. I mean, if you have made money, you're hiding it from me for sure. But it's just not the case. I know, I don't want to make big generalizing statements, but I just think, especially as physical therapists, we have to have a critical view of this issue and realize its complexity, and it's not easy, but we have to see our physicians as colleagues and not causes of this problem. Because, I mean, the situation, especially you as an emergency doc that you're put in, I mean, sometimes that's the only option that you have to do is to prescribe pain medication, especially when given the patient's expectations and their desires, and you throw in the Prescani and threat of malpractice and just all this stuff. It's just so complex, and it's not as simple as what we can typically boil it down as I've seen on social media and whatnot, at least. So sorry, I'm rambling, but
that's okay.
I'm very concerned about that. So all right, well, all that said, thank you for letting me shove a microphone in your face on our leisure drive home and just completely surprising you. So,
thanks for wanting to chat with me.
Yeah, and I want to thank you all for listening. We've been going on for 30-40 minutes now. I'm not looking at the timer, but just appreciate you tuning in, week out. That this Senior Rehab Project has grown from my wife and my mother listening to the first episode to over 10,000 downloads last month. So it's just unreal that there's that many people listening to this, and utterly frightening when I think of that. If that many people were in a room and I were to talk to them. So that's pretty wild. But thank you for doing that. Just remember to go to seniorrehabproject.com, join the email newsletter, join the Facebook group, so you can stay up to date with all the podcasts that are coming out. All the links to that stuff will be in the show notes, so check that out. Also, the podcasts are going to be moving to Tuesdays. All right, so next Monday you will not see a new podcast in your podcast catcher. Do not be upset because Tuesday they will release for Senior Rehab Podcast. So I think I got everything. And until next time, my friends.
And don't forget to stay funky.
Hit me. Thank you for listening to the Senior Rehab Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, you should hop on over to seniorrehabproject.com, where you can find more helpful content and how you can join me and many others in the movement that's changing the face of geriatric rehab. I appreciate you, and I'll talk with you next week. But in the meantime, do not forget to stay funky.